Before I began, I wanted to point out a little gem in today's service that, just got to take advantage of it when it pops up. By the way, the choir could have sung that for another 4 hours, and I wouldn't have moved a muscle. That was gorgeous. Thank you, choir. But did you notice that the text that the choir sang was drawn from the reading from Revelation? Probably did notice that. Did you also notice that the hymn that we sing, the hymn of praise that we sing at the very beginning of every service, is also drawn from Revelation 21? And here, I'm just going to take this moment to point it out. Why do we sing this every single Sunday? This is the feast of victory for our God. Did you notice that in John's vision in Revelation, he sees all of the redeemed in heaven, all of them. You, because he's seeing something that is true about eternity, so he's seeing you up there. Must have been seeing even himself up there, but that means he's also seeing every single loved one that you've ever lost in the faith. He's seeing them. And what are they doing? They're singing what we sing on Sunday mornings. And so I want you to know, it's not just poetry when we say, sing with all of the people of God, the hymn of all creation. Blessing and honor and glory and might be to God and the Lamb forever. It is truly your voices joined with all of the heavenly choir. It's a beautiful moment in our worship service, and I don't want you to miss it ever again. So that said, we'll move on to what I'm actually here to talk to you about this morning, and that is Jesus' very simple invitation. Come, have breakfast. Which is a little bit odd from Jesus, considering the fact that if you track his behavior through the Gospels, Jesus is always inviting himself over to your house to have a meal. Do you ever notice that? Hey, I'd like to come and eat with you. Hey, how about inviting me over? And he's always doing that. But now this is after the resurrection. Something major has changed. Now Jesus is inviting his disciples. Come, and he's already prepared the meal. Come, have breakfast. And I want to explore that invitation of Jesus this morning. Because if you get Jesus right, you'll get that invitation right. And I want you to do that. So, looking at some of the details of the text this morning, a good number of the little minor details really impressed me. I mean, there's some important details in the text that we're not going to talk about this morning. There's a lot of metaphors in that text. I mean, it's a true story, but the events in that text serve metaphorically in John's mind, I think, when he imagines, because this is the Jesus that has told them that they're going to become fishers of men. And so there's a lot of meaning behind the fact that, they weren't catching anything until Jesus told them how to catch or where to catch, and then all of a sudden there's more than they can handle. The whole idea of the net not breaking, that that everything they've caught is nothing is lost from what they've caught, and that they end up bringing that which they've caught to Jesus. Jesus says, "Bring it to me." There's a lot of meaning in there for discipleship, what it means to be a follower of Jesus. It means that you're that kind of a fisher person, and that God has given some instructions to the church about how to attract more followers, and that we do it His way. And when we do it His way, there's always a harvest, and not a single one will be lost. And yet it isn't that we're bringing them into Good Shepherd Lutheran Church. We're bringing them to Jesus Christ. I'm not going to preach that sermon. There are other details in this text that absolutely fascinated me this week. And it's some of the little details that maybe you might miss at first glance. Although it's hard to miss when John says, oh, well, then, Peter went and grabbed the fish. 153 of them. Like, what's up with that? Am I right? That's not the only irrelevant detail in the text. I mean, the whole detail about how Peter puts on his outer garment before he jumps into the boat, who cares? Like, why do you have to tell us that? And, it's just like there's a lot of these little details in the text that you wonder what's going on there. And then you come to realize you're dealing here with someone's memory. If you think back to the big moments of your life, the meaningful moments of your life, is it true that you can remember a lot of irrelevant details in those moments? I'll bring you back to one of my favorite big moments in my life. Not that I haven't brought you back there before, because I can't shut up about it. But remember that time that I won this New Jersey State Championship 2-mile race? Oh, sure, you've heard that before. I'm going to be that old man, Dan, that can't stop talking about that one day in high school that I was a hero. No, but it was a big day for me, and I remember a lot of the important details. I can remember which shoes I was wearing. I had to borrow them, actually. And I remember my time. I'm never going to forget that. But I can remember a bunch of irrelevant details. I can remember the exact clothes that were worn by the guy who was at the finish line with the stopwatch. Like, why do I need to hang on to that information? But it's in there. It's cemented. To this day, I can still see those khakis and that red polo shirt and that stopwatch in his hand. It's cemented in my mind. It has no bearing on the story whatsoever, but I retain it as part of the memory. And what the scholars and historians say when they look at this kind of a text, I say these little details, these irrelevant details, are circumstantial proof that what you're dealing with is a historical event. Something really happened. Someone's remembering it. And when you remember something that was super important, all those little details, even though they seem irrelevant, they're important to you. And so you write them down. There was the khakis and the red polo shirt. I remember it. The hat that he was wearing, I can tell you. And so that's why these little details are here. Do your own research on this. I encourage you. Go read the mythologies of the centuries before and after the first century when Jesus was crucified and risen from the dead. Go read the Iliad and the Odyssey, and you find me at any example, you won't see it there that, Achilles sat down and ate fish. 6 of them. Those kinds of little details had no business within the genre of mythology in first century literature. These are the stories told by historians. And so what the historians say, the theologians say, is that these stories, this story bears the mark of true history. We're dealing with something that happened. You live in a world where one day Jesus' disciples were fishing out in a boat, didn't catch a thing. The risen Christ showed up, told them to, why don't I just switch sides? And all of a sudden they caught 153 fish, not 152. Not 154, 153. And Peter put on his robe and his outer garment, and he jumped into the water. And there was a fire, and it was a charcoal fire. But don't worry, they weren't that far off from the shore. They were about 100 yards or so from the shore. Irrelevant details, but those are the kinds of details that first century historians included in their retelling of true history. These are not the kinds of stories that end up in the mythologies of the time. And so it becomes sort of like a circumstantial reason to say, okay, maybe this really did happen. Oh, of course it did. Of course it did. There's more. Here's one of the strangest details of them all. If you're tracking with the gospel stories. It's verse 2. It says that the disciples were together. Now, you might just pass right on over that verse, but wait a second. Slow down. Pump the brakes. They were together? Jesus was not the first prophet to show up in Jerusalem, claiming to be the Messiah, who had a following of people who were convinced that he wasn't crazy. Yeah, there were others. Again, the history books tell their stories, and we can read them. We know their names. We know some of the names of their followers. We know their stories, and we know that every single one of them was put to death in Jerusalem because it was considered heresy to make a claim that you're the Messiah. And every single one of those false messiahs was put to death. And guess what happened to their followers after they died? They weren't together. He went his way. She went her way. He went back to Galilee. That guy went over back into Samaria. Whatever. They went their separate ways. So the fact that these disciples were together, look, reread through the Gospels and you read them with the eye toward how did the disciples relate to each other? I don't think they liked each other very much, to be honest with you. They were arguing over which one was greater than the other. Look, you might be great, but I'm greater. They were arguing over who's going to get the best seat in the house in heaven. I want the better seat, not you. They didn't always get. They were very different types of people. I'm sure, based on last week's story, Thomas was an empiricist, and Peter is more of a rationalist, and Mary, if I can include her among the disciples, the Bible does. I mean, Mary was more of an existentialist. I mean, they had very different personalities. There were fishermen and there were tax collectors. I mean, they were cut from different cloths. They weren't the kinds of people that hang out together and go bowling. They're very different kinds of people. And look, if their leader, Jesus, waltzed into Jerusalem and claimed to be the Messiah and got killed, well, that's certainly believable because we've seen that happen before. That's an old story. But if he's risen from the dead, that's a good reason why his disciples are still together. Make no mistake, look, he's crucified, right, on a Friday. They all kind of go hiding because they don't want to be killed too. And then days turn into weeks, and then weeks turn into months, and he's just dead. If that's the story. You know how that story's going to end. Some of the disciples are going to head back up to Galilee and go back to their lives, and others, I'll stay in Jerusalem. And one of them would probably be like, hey, I'm headed back to Samaria because I really got the hots for that Samaritan woman at the well. I'd like to get to know her. But they would all go their separate ways. That's not what happened. They came together and they remained together. Because when you have a life-changing experience and you've shared it with others who have had the same life-changing experience, you are bonded together with that group of people like nobody's business. We had the funeral a few months ago for Jackie Pete. You all remember that, and many of you were here. And you know what was remarkable about the crowd that showed up that day? How many from her sorority showed up. You know why? Because they still hang out and have lunch. They do. This is her sorority from college. And it's because they endured something together. They had a common experience. They became a community. And even though lives have changed and they've gotten married and moved to other places, they still get together. And they're still a community. They're together. And you and me, you and I, we are that community. Because we're the recipients of the risen Christ. Because he's come into our lives and radically changed them in ways that maybe we'll detail here in a few moments. Because we have this most important thing in common. We come together. And we have a bond here that is unlike a bond anywhere else because it's rooted in a radically new life, an everlasting life, a salvation that can only be brought through the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So we come together, more than that. It's in coming together that we get to know Jesus better. It's true that certain people bring out certain characteristics of certain other people better than other people. So like your spouse brings out certain aspects of your personality in a way that nobody else does. That's true. Your best friends bring out, let's just say they bring out the best of you in a way that other people don't. Or if they bring out the worst in you, maybe they're not such good friends after all. But this is what people do. They have a certain relationship, and it's C.S. Lewis tells a story. He was part of this little crowd of authors that would get together and have a beer and talk, and they were quite a little community. They were a little crowd of people, and one of them died. And Lewis writes in his writings, he says that now that this one fellow was gone, he thought, I'll be able to spend more time, I'll be able to enjoy, or I'll be able to appreciate one of the other. There were two there that were sort of like best friends. And he thought, well, now that the guy's best friend is gone, maybe I'll get to, be a better friend to that guy. And what he found out was actually there were certain things about this other friend that the friend who was now gone, only he could bring out of that guy. And so it wasn't that he got more of this other friend of his. He ended up getting less of him because of the loss of this third friend of theirs. Like there were certain jokes that this other guy would tell, and it would bring out a certain kind of laughter in his friend, and that was gone. And it's true that there are certain aspects of our personality that only Jesus brings out of us. And if you really, really want to get to know one another in Christ, you got to come together. But more than that, there are certain aspects of Jesus Christ that only you bring out. And so if you really want to get to know Jesus Christ in a comprehensive manner, it's not enough just to get to know him internally, by yourself, alone with your Bible and your prayers. Those are good times. Spend them. But if you really want to broaden your understanding of Jesus, you got to understand that there's certain aspects of who Jesus Christ is and how he interacts with us that only Dan Purdy is going to bring out. And if you're not hanging out with Dan Purdy, you might not never meet Jesus in that special kind of way that Dan has. You got to come together for that. It's especially true for those of us who have this common experience, this life-changing experience. I'll tell you one more irrelevant detail from that day that I won the state meet, because I'm not going to stop talking about it. There was a person at the finish line of that race. It wasn't even a member of my team. I remember the guys in my team that were there to cheer me on. I remember all that. But there was another guy at the finish line that I remember. He was there. And when I went to college, that kid came to the same college I did. I'd never met him before, but I saw him as a freshman. I said, I know who you are. You went to the Hun school. You were at their state meet. I knew who this kid was, and I'd only ever seen him that one moment. And why did I remember that irrelevant detail? Because he and I shared that moment. Now, it's not the perfect metaphor because it wasn't quite as big a moment for him as it was for me. But the point is, it's like, by sharing that experience, he became important to me. And his retelling of that day became important to me because he had a different experience than mine. And all the more true when you imagine all the different people, and some of the people in this room are strangers to you. But all the more reason why you want to get to know them. Who is Jesus to that person? How has Jesus impacted that person's life? And what aspect of Jesus' personality is going to surprise you when you get to know that person? We got to come together, and that's, of course, why we're doing our Wednesday night thing. I mean, we're starting this coming Wednesday night with a meal. And Debbie, I got to tell them, Debbie, what I've already told you. Because this is a vision a year and a half in the making. To have a regular Wednesday evening fellowship meal followed by some activities. And of course, the first 4 of them, these are going to be a class that I'm teaching. But after that, we're going to do all kinds of other things. Some of you want to do card night. We're going to play cards, or we're going to watch a movie, or we're going to maybe have a hootenanny. You know, we'll do some stuff. Michelle likes the idea of a hootenanny. But it's a dream come true for me. And when Debbie came to me a year and a half ago and said, I'd like to do something. I'd like to have a fellowship meal every Wednesday night. I went, it's a beam of light from above. I said, that's exactly what I want to do. And I think it's important for us. So here's the thing. Even if you're not planning to come to the class, come to the meal. Let's be together. Let's get to know Jesus through each other's eyes in ways that we'll never get to know if it's just me and Jesus. So they came together. It's a weird thing that they came together. In fact, Peter's like, hey, let's go fishing. And I get the idea that they didn't really want to go fishing. If the story doesn't go like this. Peter said, let's go, I want to go fishing. And all the other disciples said, hey, we want to go fishing too. That didn't happen. But he wants to go fishing. So guess what they did? They went fishing because Peter wanted to go fishing. So come. There's people in this room that have already made up their mind not to come to the meal on Wednesday. I want you to change your mind. Come, be together. Come have breakfast. Well, dinner. Maybe some Wednesday we'll have breakfast for dinner. One last little thought about this text that I think is important for us to note. And that is that Jesus has certainly radically transformed the lives of these disciples. I mean, that's why they're still together. But I really moved by Peter's transformation, especially. How many of you remember the story in Luke chapter 5 where Jesus also encounters the disciples who've been trying to go fishing and they've caught nothing? Remember that story? They're out in the boat and they're trying to fish and they're not catching anything, and that happens sometimes. And Jesus shows up and he's like, hey, why don't you try it a different way? And they're like, okay. He thinks he knows, and they do it, and all of a sudden there's this gigantic catch of fish, and all of a sudden then they realize it's Jesus. And do you remember what Peter does in that story in Luke chapter 5? When Peter realizes that it's Jesus, that it's the Lord, he says, depart from me, for I'm a sinner. Now, this is the exact same Peter. The only thing that's changed is that Jesus has suffered and died for sinners and risen again from the dead. Now, this same Peter is in a boat. The circumstances are remarkably similar. The disciples are fishing. They caught nothing. Jesus shows up, and they don't quite realize that it's Jesus yet, but he tells them, well, why don't you change your, try a chartreuse lure instead. And so they throw their thing on the other side of the boat, and boom, there's a bunch of fish. And Peter, this time, same Peter, same sinner. It's not like suddenly Peter isn't a sinner, same sinner. Instead of saying, Jesus, depart from me, he's jumping into the water to get near him. What's changed? I'll tell you. You don't need me to tell you, but I will anyway. His sin problem has been dealt with by Jesus. And so Jesus' invitation is no longer threatening. Look, if you don't understand who Jesus is, or if you don't believe who Jesus is, if you don't know and believe that he suffered and died for you, that the death that he died on the cross was literally for the sake of your own sin, and that his resurrection means that your sin problem has been put aside. It's no longer a barrier. It's no longer, Jesus, depart from me. It's You receive his invitation to come and have breakfast joyfully because there's no longer a barrier between you and God. It's been knocked down. And when that's the case for Peter, everything is different. He's running to Jesus to have breakfast with him. And that's what's happened for you and for me. When your God is a false God, one that has no power to redeem you, one that has no power to reconcile you to God with respect to your sin, when your God is just something you really, really love and is as a false God, when something happens that undermines that false sense of security that comes from false gods, you react like Peter in Luke 5. Either you reject, you don't want God to get anywhere near you because it's too uncomfortable to be revealed for who you really are, or you want to avoid your own self. You want to depart from me. You want to isolate from yourself, or you want to isolate from your friends or your family. Or when you don't have a God who has reconciled your sin to the one and only true God in heaven, then you have the Luke 5 problem that Peter has. Depart from me, for I'm a sinner. But when your God has died for you and reconciled your sinful life to the perfect God in heaven, you don't have to hide anymore. All of the things that would cause you to feel that guilt, it's all been dealt with. And so when Jesus says, come, you come with joy, with running. You jump out of the boat and into the water, and off you go. And what could be better than being reunited with the one who has dealt with your sin? I'll tell you what's different between Luke 5 and John 21. Peter has received the gospel. And here's what the gospel is. Your relationship with God is no longer based on your history. It's based on Christ's history. And everything that he's done applies to you. And so you could be the greatest sinner in the world, and you would still be the most redeemed and the most welcomed and the most invited. As Jesus says to you, come, let's have breakfast. Amen.